This is part 2 of the explanatory failure of Benatars Asymmetry. David Benatar has put forth an argument for anti-natalism, which is the position that procreation is always wrong. His argument is known as the asymmetry argument for anti-natalism, and briefly it claims that there is an asymmetry between pleasure and pain for those who never exist. For those who never exist, he claims, the absence of pain is good, and the absence of pleasure is merely not bad, and this creates an imbalance of good over bad for never existing. And he believes that this implies that coming into existence is always a harm. Now, I think this is a very bad argument, and I've explained it in more detail in my video, The Double Standard Behind Benatar's Asymmetry Argument for Anti-Natalism. And in that video, I've explained why it is a bad argument, because it's based on a double standard. Now, after he makes his main argument for this asymmetry, he also claims that it's the best explanation for 4 other asymmetries he thinks people commonly believe. In a previous video called The Explanatory Failure of Benatars Asymmetry, I explained why his asymmetry is not the best explanation for the first asymmetry that he brings up. In this video, I'm going to address the second asymmetry that he brings up and explain why his asymmetry is not a good explanation for it. So let's look at what that asymmetry says. David Benatar writes, "Whereas it is strange, if not incoherent, to give a reason for having a child that the child will thereby be benefited, it is not strange to cite a potential child's interests as a basis for avoiding bringing a child into existence." Well, this has 2 parts, and each part may have an overriding interpretation and a non-overriding interpretation. So let's first look at the non-overriding interpretation of each part. And this says, "Whereas it is strange that one of the reasons why anyone would have a child is that the child would be benefited, it is not strange that the child's best interest would ever count as a reason against bringing a child into existence." Well, it would seem that anti-natalists themselves are an example of the second part here. They are people who count the well-being of a child count the best interests of a child as a reason against bringing that child into existence. And other reasons people may use to take the best interests of a child into account in determining whether to bring into existence would be things like, will the child be diseased? Will the child grow up in a bad environment, such as one that's crime-ridden or war-torn? Or will the child be severely handicapped? And also, people normally avoid having children with very close relatives. One of the reasons for this being that they don't want to pass on genetic diseases that might be passed on through recessive genes that each of them might have. So, with the idea of having healthier children rather than unhealthy children, people may avoid having children with close relatives, instead choose to have children with other people. But there is an objection that can be made here to all of these examples except the anti-natalist one. And this objection is that what people are really doing is choosing a greater good over a lesser good. It's not that they think that a particular child's life is not going to be worth living at all, but rather they're choosing between the lives of at least 2 different potential children. And they want to choose the one that's going to lead the best life possible. And so that's why they would not have children under various circumstances where the child would be more likely to lead a less happy life. So these might not be examples where people are purely taking into account the best interests of the child in question. But it may still be an example where at least they're considering what's in the best interests of potential children. And they're weighing what's in the best interest of one against what's in the best interest of another. And this is not an overriding claim here. This is just saying that they take these interests into account. So, I think we can accept this part of this asymmetry here. And now let's take a look at the other part. It is strange that one of the reasons why anyone would have a child is that the child would be benefited. And I think this isn't true. Many times when people are thinking about having children, they think about what they can do for the children that they're going to have. And sometimes people choose to have children when they're in better circumstances, where they're better able to take care of the children than they would be than they were at a previous time when they were less able to take care of the children. For example, a teenage girl might have an abortion as a teenager, but then grow into an adult and choose to have children at that time because at that time she's better able to take care of children. And also, Erik Erikson has described 8 stages of psychosocial development. One of these is called generativity versus stagnation. This is the 7th one he describes. And at this stage, people are interested in contributing to the world and taking care of other people and looking out for the next generation. And to satisfy this generative impulse that many people feel at this stage, many people tend to have families, to start families and have children. So I believe people do consider the benefit to a child as one of the reasons they have for having children. They may have other reasons, such as self-interested reasons for having children. But I think many times people do take into consideration what the benefit they could bring to a child would be, and that's one of the reasons they'll have a child. So since this interpretation is false overall, it has no need for an explanation. And whether or not Benatars asymmetry could explain it doesn't matter. So let's move on to the overriding interpretation. This says, whereas it is strange that anyone, despite not otherwise wanting a child, would have one for the sole reason that it would be benefited, it is not strange that a potential child's interests would lead potential parents to not have a child despite otherwise wanting one. So I was already leading up to the overriding interpretation here of the second part when I was talking about the second part of the non-overriding interpretation. And I was raising the objection that many instances may be cases where people are just comparing one life to another. They're saying one life would not be quite as good as another. And not that they're saying that this life would be bad to live altogether, and for that reason, we're not going to have this child. Though possibly there are cases like this. Here's a hypothetical case that could be like this. Let's say there is a genetic disease that's passed on by recessive genes, which causes a person to feel constant agony during life. And we have 2 people, each with a recessive gene for this disease, and if those recessive genes combined into a child, that child would have the genetic disease and suffer agony. So this would give them an incentive not to have children together, or if they really wanted to have children with each other, to at least do some genetic screening on any fetuses that were conceived and abort ones that would have this genetic disease, because they don't want to have a child who is going to be in constant agony. And no one really wants to live like that. So, at least with hypothetical examples like this, we can say that the second part is true. Though it is very hard for me to imagine a real-life example where we would know for sure that someone would live a miserable life, and so it would be a good idea not to have that child. So I'll accept this part is true. And let's consider the first part up here. Now, previously I rejected the first part of the non-overriding interpretation. Is there a good reason to reject this part? Let's consider it. It is strange that anyone, despite not otherwise wanting a child, would have one for the sole reason that it would be benefited. Okay, this is different than the non-overriding interpretation. Here, the parents have no they're not self-interested in having a child. They don't want a child. But just for the sake of benefiting the child, they would choose to have one. And this does seem strange because they're not taking any of their own self-interest into consideration, as people normally do in choosing to have children or choosing to do other things that affect their lives, or in choosing, having a child is a major life decision. And when people make major life decisions, they usually consider their own interests as well as the interests of other people. Now, so it looks like that's true, and the second part is true, so this whole asymmetry is true. And since it is true, it needs an explanation. So let's first consider how Benatar's asymmetry is supposed to explain this. Okay, Benatar's asymmetry is supposed to imply that it is always a harm to come into existence. And if it's always a harm to come into existence, then of course it would be strange to do something that is harmful to someone solely for that person's benefit. That would be very strange. It would be like me punching you in the face solely for your own benefit. And let's take a look at the second part. It is not strange that a potential child's interest would lead potential parents to not have a child despite otherwise wanting a child. Well, if coming into existence is always a harm, it would not be strange for potential parents to avoid doing this because it would always be a harm. So that's how his asymmetry would explain this. But I think this is not a good explanation for it. And one of the reasons it's not a good explanation for it is that there are other asymmetries similar to this one, which share a very important common feature with this asymmetry, but which cannot be explained by his explanation for this. And one of these asymmetries goes like this. Whereas it is strange that anyone, despite not otherwise wanting to have sex with someone, would do so for the sole reason that the other person would be benefited, it is not strange that a potential partner's interest would lead someone to not have sex with her, despite otherwise wanting to. First of all, let me point out that Benatar's asymmetry between 3 and 4 cannot explain this because it's about it on a different topic. It's about having sex with people rather than about coming into existence. Now, if we try to explain this in the most analogous way, we might explain it by saying that sex is always harmful. And if sex is always harmful, then it would be strange to have sex with someone solely for that person's benefit, because apparently this would be harming the other person for their own benefit, and that would be very strange. And also, if sex is harmful, it would not be strange that bearing this in mind would give us a reason to not have sex with someone that we otherwise want to have sex with. Because, since sex is harmful, we basically shouldn't be having sex with anyone at all. But this is not really the best explanation for this. We know that this asymmetry is true, but the explanation that sex is always harmful seems preposterous, because normally people do not think that sex is always harmful. There may be circumstances in which sex is harmful. It could lead to venereal diseases or unwanted pregnancies. But under the right circumstances, say where people are in love with each other, they're not cheating on other people, they're practicing safe sex, we wouldn't expect sex to be harmful. And most people think that sex is something enjoyable and that they look forward to having, or want to have in the case where they're not having it. So people generally have a favorable attitude towards sex, although there may be various moral restrictions on when people can have sex. But for the most part, people don't think that sex is wholly wrong altogether. Now, what this has in common with the asymmetry that Benatar is trying to explain is that it's saying that it's strange that someone would do something positively. The commission of something is for altruistic reasons is strange, but the omission of something for altruistic reasons is not strange. And this actually has a valid explanation. Let me bring up the distinction between negative duties and positive duties. Negative duties are duties to avoid doing something, and positive duties are duties to go out and do a particular thing. And I think generally people think of morality in terms of negative duties more than in terms of positive duties. They normally think of morality, say, as restrictions upon their behavior more than they do about things they can go out and do to make the world a better place. And overall, I think negative duties tend to be less controversial, whereas positive duties tend to be more controversial. And negative duties are more easily agreed upon. We can easily agree upon things like you should not kill, you should not enslave people, you should not rob from people. But it's harder to agree upon what our positive duties could be. Should I work at a soup kitchen regularly? Should I volunteer to help people learn to read? Should I be doing both? Or are there other positive things I should be doing to make the world a better place? It's hard to pin down just what positive things people should be doing if in fact they do have positive duties. And negative duties seldom conflict with each other because they simply restrict behavior. But positive duties can more easily come into conflict with negative duties and with each other and even with themselves sometimes. You might have a duty to serve your country in the military and also a duty not to kill people, and those could come into conflict. Or you might have a duty to help one person and a duty to help another person, but be unable to help both of them. So there's that. And also, negative duties fit in better with our own psychology. They set limits on where our natural motivations may lead us, whereas positive duties may ask us to do things that we're not otherwise motivated to do. So, negative duties are asking for a smaller change in our behavior than positive duties are, and that's one of the reasons why people are more comfortable with negative duties than with positive duties. Now, one of the things about negative duties is that they restrict our behavior. They forbid us to do certain things. And they give us a strong, compelling reason to not do certain things. But positive duties, if they exist, do not give us as strong a reason to go out and do a particular positive thing. You know, even if there are various good things that we should be doing, we can't really agree upon what they are. And the reason for going out and doing a particular positive thing, such as producing more children, if that's a positive thing that people can do, we just don't have as a compelling a reason to do that, morally speaking, as we would do to, say, not torture babies. So far, Benatars asymmetry has not been helpful in explaining this asymmetry. The non-overriding interpretation has proven false, and because of that, it does not need any explanation at all. And the overriding interpretation can be explained without referring to Benatars asymmetry, and in fact, it's better explained that way. Now, Benatar has one more chance, and that is with a mixed version of this asymmetry. It combines the true part of the non-overriding interpretation with the other part of the overriding interpretation. And it says, whereas it is strange that anyone, despite not otherwise wanting a child, would have one for the sole reason that it would be benefited, it is not strange that the child's best interest would ever count as a reason against bringing a child into existence. And I don't think that this one fares any better. First of all, let's look at the first part. It is strange that anyone, despite not otherwise wanting a child, would have one for the sole reason that it would be benefited. And I've already explained why this is strange in discussing the overriding interpretation. And here, it is not strange that the child's best interest would ever count as a reason against bringing a child into existence. And here I've already explained why this is not strange while discussing the non-overriding interpretation. This one is not strange because people could be comparing the best interest for one child versus another and choosing the child that's going to have the best life possible. Okay, so that covers that. Benatar has failed to explain this asymmetry, and there are two more asymmetries, and I'm going to discuss those in one or two subsequent videos, depending upon how much time it will take to discuss each one. So look forward to those. And let me mention that the text version of what I just went over in this video will appear on my blog under the same title. As you can see, I've recently done a facelift for the blog. I've changed the theme to one that is responsive on a desktop and on a phone, so it's going to look very good on your phone as well. And let me just page through the article just in case the blog ever goes away and you want to read what it actually says. You have been watching For the Love of Wisdom, my YouTube channel on free thought, philosophy, and critical thinking. If you've liked this video, please favorite it or share it or like it down below. And if you haven't done so already, please consider subscribing to For the Love of Wisdom. That's all one word. There's a button for it in the top right corner here. And now let me show you a preview of some videos on related subjects. You believe happiness is only for people too naive to understand how the world really works. Do you sympathize with the writer of Ecclesiastes when he says, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity"? Are you not only unhappy, but proud of it because your more sophisticated understanding of the world makes you better than a happy simpleton? If you've answered yes to these questions, you may be experiencing what Bertrand Russell has called Byronic unhappiness. And this is the subject of the second chapter of his book, The Conquest of Happiness, which is the subject of this video. Hello, Jesus Freak 777 has made a video in which he asks atheists to submit their own 10 Commandments. He believes that there is nothing better than the 10 Commandments to tell us how to live our lives. He believes there's nothing you can take away from the 10 Commandments, and there's nothing you can add to them. They're perfect just the way they are. I would disagree. I believe we can improve on the 10 Commandments, that there are some things we can take out, and there are some things that we ought to add. And so I'm going to present here what I call a humanist hexadecalogue, which is a set of 16 commandments. The first 10 are based on the 10 commandments from the Bible. Sometimes there's a major modification, sometimes there's just tweaking or adding some details. And the remaining 6 are things that the Bible and the 10 commandments don't really concern themselves